Why not?
Hello.
Hi.
This is something very different for me. We are here today with the one and only Mr. R.R.Virdi, the author of the first binding in the Dawn of Midnight. To,
Woohoo.
and congratulations on the release of Dawn of Midnight. It went down a
Thank
storm,
you.
didn't it?
Yeah. It seems like it's been doing really, really great. I haven't been able to keep up with everything, but just the social niceties and presence, I guess, seems like it's been going really well. I've been tagged in booksellers who have been super sweet to reach out to me, as well as just friends finding like copies are all gone in their local stores, or like there's one left in the first week. So like it's clearly moving everywhere. So yeah, I can't complain. It seems amazing.
And that's
Yeah.
amazing as well, right? Because it's a sequel. So sometimes you'll
Yeah.
expect like a dip or something. But I think obviously having all of this amazing online tour that you're doing has drummed up exactly what you wanted.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you're correct. I do think sequels drop off. It was something I was afraid of because I've heard about that. But I don't know. The pre-orders that I did with a wonderful independent local bookstore were actually better for book two than they were for book one. The noise certainly seems better. It seems like the series is slowly picking up like a quiet cult fan base
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that I wasn't aware of, because I keep hearing from booksellers it's just like selling super steadily. So it's not like
Yeah.
an explosion. It just doesn't stop. It just keeps chugging
Mm-hmm.
along.
Yeah, I think with some books though, because the first book kind of did for me. It came out of nowhere a bit because somebody all of a sudden people were talking about this book, the first binding. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. For some people like me, it takes a while for me to actually pick the first book of a series up. But once I like it, I'm
Mhm.
like, right, okay, I need more. So that's when it actually picks up for me. It's just like I'm the kind of person who'll read the first one and then just binge the whole thing. Um, so yeah, it took me a while to pick it up, but then obviously once I do, it's just like, right, okay, now I love this. I need to get more, and then I go to like check out people's backlists and stuff. So I think it depends what kind of readers you hit as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I think it also helps because obviously the first binding, it's not a little book.
Right.
It's a big boy.
It's a
And
chunk.
obviously that's a bit scary as a reader, and also knowing that it's going to be a series. It's just like a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
of chunky ones coming on, but the fact that obviously it's attracting all these people is fantastic because it's not just you read it in 5 seconds, or maybe some people are very fast at reading, but like you read it in 5 seconds and it's over, and you're like, okay, move on. Like it's
Yeah.
so in depth
Yeah.
and there's so much to it.
Yeah,
It really draws you in. It's fantastic.
yeah,
Thank you. That
yeah.
was
So
something I definitely wanted. And I don't want to speak for everybody, but I know growing up the way I did, it was the time of like the chunky fantasies when they were first happening, like in the 90s.
Mm.
yeah,
I was picking up like, you could go to the store, or I mean, it's sort of like the local library. I grew up very poor, so the libraries where I read.
Mm.
And you would find copies of like Cad Williams's early stuff, and those were like the huge door stoppers. Like I think
Yeah.
the last book, Two Green Angel Tower, was like 500,000 words. It's bigger than what some people are putting out today still.
Mm.
And Robert Jordan, and then obviously after him, George R.R. Martin. The 90s to early 2000s, there was this wave of like the big fantasy you could get lost into for forever. And
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I found a lot of value in that as a kid who was starting to imagine things, and like this was a form of entertainment that just went on forever for one book, like per
Yeah.
book. There was just so much space,
yeah,
and I think it cultured me at least into always having a soft spot for that kind of fantasy. Because I know right now it's really popular, and some of this is driven by the industry for the shorter, faster books.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Like attention spans are dropping. TikTok, it's very easy to be short, snappy, and in your face, and quick and done.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know if as I've gotten older, like it's like you said, I kind of don't remember a lot of those books anymore, and I'm sure that's just like a me thing, and anyone else maybe who's gone through something similar as you get older, I don't know, but I'm
Mm.
starting to enjoy more fantasy I can sit back and luxuriate with. Like I don't want it to
Mm-hmm.
be done
yeah,
fast. I want to sit and read a really good chapter and then pause and reflect on it.
Yeah.
And that's completely like a me thing. I know it's not everybody, but in a world of 8 billion, I think there might be also that group of subset of people like who just want that they want to read a fantasy just a little bit maybe slower or more measured pace, and like
Mm-hmm.
lose themselves
yeah,
in it for a while.
Yeah. I'd say
yeah,
that's me now. Like, I tried reading Robin Hobb a while ago. Obviously, her first book is not the
Mhm.
biggest, But that series is what, 16 books long,
Yeah.
and I remember being like, oh, I'm not sure if this series is going to be for me. It's quite slow. There's a lot to it, even in that first like 400-page book. But now that I'm older, I'm like, I'd rather just, like you said, sit and dive into fantasy. I'm still a lover of short chapters, I will say, because I feel like I'm accomplishing more with just me. But the fact that like these bigger books are still around and still coming out is fantastic, because
Yeah.
like the old school fantasy, it is like that. Like you said, Wheel of Time, those books are quite chunky for every single book.
Yeah.
I think for me, I've developed as a reader as I only came back to reading in 2020, and then when I came back to reading, I started with a lot of like YA fantasy, and then I went into like I started reading sort of like some of the faster paced stuff like Lee Bardugo and some fantasy romance, Sarah J. Maas and stuff, and I kind of, for me, it's a case of if I know what I'm going into, then I know what to expect. So
Yeah.
for me, again, because I got used to reading things so fast, for me it was a case of like not punishing myself for taking a bit more time with a book, because so many people that I know are like flying through. I mean, I can fly through 4 or 5 books a week when they're really short and fast paced, but the first binding was, it took me in bits and bobs like over 2 weeks in total to read it from start to finish. But that's not a bad thing, and I need to stop telling myself that that's a bad thing, because I enjoyed every single part of it, and I loved. I messaged Chelsea between it, and I was just like where are you at this bit? Like, have you got to this bit? Yeah, what percentage are you at?
Yeah.
And for me, it was really unique that because I will always read a blurb when I first I'm interested in a book, but then I won't read it again when I pick the book up. So we were just getting into it, and I really liked it how at first he don't use his own name, like like unless you went back and read the blurb, you don't actually find out his name till a little bit further in, and it's like, who is this mysterious storyteller, and why is he like so mysterious? It's like he's so you just want to know more about him. It's like he's such an enigmatic character, and he's the storyteller, and it's like, what does that mean? And it had me turning the pages constantly. And even though it was slower paced and there's no epic battles and stuff, I find the more that I learn about him, the more that I wanted to know. So for me, that was the driving factor for me, is like it's really, really character driven, and it's focused on him and his story. And I loved the fact that it was sort of, I don't know how to like what tense it is, whatever. It was obviously it's him telling his story about him telling his story, and that just like I was just like, oh my god, I love this so much. So what brought you to that kind of concept of like, he's obviously he's a storyteller, so he's telling his own story, and like the way that, how did you come up with that setup?
Well, part of it was originally I was doing a standalone fantasy that was like an anti-colonial fantasy that had a revolutionary character in it, and in it originally he was going to be the character called the Storyteller, who had like all these legendary stories about the character who was the protagonist, as well as his own life and so many others. And the more I started fleshing him out as a really cool background character, he started taking over the idea and just what I wanted to do, like a bard would.
Yeah.
And I took other concepts I'd been sitting on about like Silk Road, the history of storytelling that I already loved, the life of famous epics and stuff, like not just the classical epics like Gilgamesh and the Odyssey or the Iliad, and the South Asian ones, Mahabharata and Ramayana, but the idea of just stories like Marco Polo, Ibn Fadlan, or Ibn Battuta, who has a book called Ibn Fadlan, which was his journey from the Middle East to as far as Russia. And he was a trader, and he sort of had these larger than life experiences too. And with him, he brought a storyteller, because storytellers were the original rock stars of the fantasy world. They would go and perform.
Yeah.
They would collect stories from wherever they were, and they trade them along the Silk Road, for example. And you could bring one with you to break the ice, to ingratiate yourself to nobles or people you want to trade with. And it kind of created like the perfect character for a travelogue. But when I realized that I can't do a storytelling story with a storyteller without it being about the history of stories, which is something I already separately loved, and they sort of all started combining into this meta, like how do I do a analysis, a commentary, and something that's referential, not just to existing stories and myths, but also within itself. So Ari can
Yeah.
reference parts of his own journey, and as things happen, both past and present, they continue to comment and build on past things that you might have thought weren't important, or an
Mhm.
Easter egg, or a little nesting
Yeah.
story now becomes infinitely more valuable. So the more you reread it, it becomes kind of like an accordion structure, and you can compress it based on how you want, depending on which viewpoints of the story that you're compartmentalizing to reference, or the whole
Mhm.
thing. And then the structure itself is what's known as a frame narrative, which was first invented in South Asia with the South Asian epics, which is where you have a framing story around the outside and then you have the
Yeah.
inside stories. And how far you take them can also be analog to like Russian nesting dolls, because at times, so in a novella I'm working on the side, there's a story within a story within a story, because the character inside of a fictional story is telling the story. And
Mm.
Yeah.
it allowed me to really, really play with that and what I could do with narrative structure and payoffs, and sort of keeping the audience hooked along for different, I guess, promises, because you have the promises of Ari's journey in the present and the promise of his past. But then the nesting stories can also be entertaining, as well as like the idea that you might think that these might become important at some point. Like they don't just exist superfluously, but they
Mhm.
Yeah.
feel important also just by themselves. Like there is a little narrative inside there that adds either joy, a moment of sorrow, maybe it's nesting for something else further down to build off of, but there's a purpose and it can almost stand alone. And this literally let me do all that so I could create, like, I guess the ultimate storytelling love letter about storytelling and the history of
Yeah.
stories.
I honestly was like, I was trying to think about another like book that I've read that has that sort of similar vibe, and I can't really think of another type of story that I've read,
Mm.
especially when it. When you said Harry wasn't initially a main character, I could not imagine him as a side character. He is too
Yeah,
much of like the light is on me, like
Yeah.
it's all about
yeah,
me.
yeah, yes,
He
yes,
could not just stand in the
absolutely.
shadows and tell someone else's story. It just
And,
wouldn't
and
work for him, would it at all?
and that's kind of how it happened. Originally, he was supposed to be sort of like a fun nod to Aragon when you first, and I was going by the movie layout, when you first see him as Strider in the bar in the corner,
Mhm.
very enigmatic, and like he steals the scene even though nothing happens at first. Frodo just notices him, and the barkeeper's like, "Oh, that's one of those rangers, and they're mysterious folk." And like around here, he goes by Strider, and he's just like sitting there menacingly. Ari was supposed to be like that, drawing attention to himself, trying not to draw attention to himself in the
Mm.
background.
Yeah.
And the more I started playing with him, he took over, and it just became okay. I'm going to take all these other concepts I had and I'm going to shuffle them and do this series for a while, and then I'll come back to the
Yeah.
standalone some other time in the future, maybe.
So we've got a few
Yes.
comments. So it doesn't help that Ronnie hides a million secrets and Easter eggs on every page that you have to excavate to figure out. I mean, that is totally true. Like every story that Ari told when he went back to his past, it's like obviously we're gonna come back to this. Like you need to remember this story because and the characters we meet along the way. It's like, well, clearly this hasn't been mentioned for no reason. It's gonna mean something further down the line,
Mm.
and it's just. I like it when you do read further down the line in the book. Obviously, no spoilers, but when you remember what the story was that it connects to, and what the character was that connects it, and then you're like, okay, that's why that story was told. Like that's why that character was brought up before. Hello. Doors of Midnight was a very engaging read. So many clever things going on.
Oh,
I enjoyed it more than the first binding.
I appreciate that. Wow, that's also really fast. Like it just came out. People are carrying through that.
Some
Too many
people
clever
read
things.
really fast.
Yeah, yeah. It's bigger than book one, which is what I'm surprised about. It doesn't look like it, but it
Mm.
published because there's a publishing crisis, so they found ways to shrink the actual size of the book, even though it's 30K longer material wise. So it's about
Mm.
another 150 pages longer.
Oh wow.
Oh, thank
Ooh,
you. The
nice.
twist on the Enchantress trope. Okay, I'm glad people like that and they caught that.
Many other things. Yeah, so it feels like a long saga more than a trilogy. Something like 1001 Nights, but not
Yeah,
quite.
those were all
Yeah.
inspirations. There's actually a nod to Scheherazad's story. There is a little nod to Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves in book two. The whole purpose of this was to be a meta commentary on the history of stories while
Mhm.
using the actual story I'm recreating in Tales of Tremaine as like a vehicle for that, but also a meta analysis. So Ari can almost comment on story tropes at time, which actually happens in book two, because in
Mm.
his world also stories exist, and some of them have very similar tropes to all the ones in our world.
Yeah.
I'm a comparative mythology buff, and one of the things about this was trying to point out how much mythology is actually similar around the world, and people don't realize that because they've only heard like either a few Western myths that have gotten re-popular and told, or the most famous bits of myths that have transitioned over, but not the overall like larger mythical bodies of stories. All of the epics, certain character arcs that are very similar, down to weapons and certain good versus evil tropes. And
Yeah.
this person is correct. This was actually planned as a long saga, not even a trilogy. So people might want to know we sold 3 books to Tor and Go Lengths, but the series is planned for longer. Hopefully, I get to
Okay.
do it all, but
Ooh.
it is structured to be it's about Wheel of Time long when I was pitching it to them to show.
Wow.
It's not because
Wow.
it is inspired like a saga. Like there's a larger
Yeah.
Yeah.
story, and the first 3 are kind of like a prequel where you're learning what is already chasing, and then it keeps going to the next arc, which is okay. Now you know what he's chasing. How does he get there? What's the big
Yeah.
climactic arc that they're building to, and then a resolution arc.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I can see many special
I haven't
editions
missed
in your
it.
future then.
Yeah.
I don't smolder.
He's smoldered, yeah. I mean, I've seen your author pictures. You smolder. You smolder. Not his peak smolder level. There will be more smolders. You can really see one
Well,
his growth with this. I
I don't think they're
that's
talking
a
about your
thing.
smolder, but I could be wrong.
I'm from India, and it is so difficult to describe meditation in non-fiction, let alone fiction, to use I can't speak. Transcendental
Transcendental,
meditation.
yeah.
Yeah. Vama Atma as a basis for magic system rules.
So I'm
Like
glad somebody
Ari as
caught
a
that. Yes.
character. Yeah.
So there is actually a lot of transcendental meditation and South Asian techniques specifically encoded in my magic system, but it's also analogous to Western stuff. There's a little overlap with certain like the doctrine of correspondence and Hermetic beliefs, as well as Greco-Roman spiritual beliefs. Things along the Silk Road that I guess people would now consider pagan, but we're just talking pre-Christian certain spiritual beliefs and
Yeah.
practices rooted specifically within South Asian ones. So I have a reference to something called the Atam or Atam, which is similar to the Atma. So it's the idea of the spirit, but also the space that you occupy around yourself. So kind of like a spiritual bubble, which is what Ari
Mhm.
Yeah.
talks about with some of the bindings in the first place. The space around yourself that still exists that you can sort of occupy larger than your physical body. There's
Yeah.
also another meditative practice that actually spread because of Buddhism from India to China and Japan, and it's the actual candle meditation that Ari does. There's actually a
Mm.
real one called Tartaka, which is where you sit and gaze with a candle, and you focus on the little flame, and it kind of serves as like your third eye. You're envisioning it there, and you can even envision it when you close your eyes, and it serves as a meditative focal point just to increase your focus, blood flow to your brain. It's shown up in Chinese films. Return to the 36th Chamber of Shaolin. So kung fu films have featured that meditative technique, and then even in Avatar: The Last Airbender, they use it as a focal point for brainwashing instead. Where if you're familiar with the what is it? There is no something in Bossing Bay. There's no war. There's that scene where a character is locked in a prison, and there's a little candle, and
Mhm.
something's
Yeah.
revolving around it. And yeah, so there's a lot of like South Asian stuff secretly coded without me overtly telling people, for another Easter egg for people to pick up.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
interesting actually, because I don't think from a lot of the fantasy that I'm currently reading, it's not based so much on like myths. Obviously, a lot of people will
Mhm.
go out and they'll create their own worlds, or primarily a lot of what I'm reading at the minute is like medieval. So you're basing it just on like history rather than like the myths and the
Mhm.
legends that go around in the world, and I think that was really interesting. I feel like I learned a lot when I
Yeah.
read.
It has made me want to look into like Southeast Asian history a bit more, because obviously you could tell that that is like a massive passion, and the way that obviously Ari is supposed to tell the story, but the way that Ari tells the stories of Brahman, it is basically just like you're learning as you go. So you learn about him, you're also learning about the world as well through what he tells you. And it's kind of, he is still showing you, and it's really strange that it's a very much show not tell, but the way that it's
Mhm.
explained is I'm a very visual sort of reader as well, so the fact that he goes into quite a big description about things, I can envision how things look in my head. The way that, and like that for me is a sign of a really great writer, is that if you can tell me about something that I have know nothing about, and I can envision it made, I'm like, right, okay, yeah, like that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. And also just the idea of the fact that you do write so well in the showing not telling. Did you know you're really good at that, or is that just?
So part of that was specifically something I even wanted to improve on more with this series. This is sort of a lesson that I took to heart from Jim Butcher, where he advised always working on your craft. And coming from indie, I was actually told a little bit the opposite, where marketing matters a lot more. And I don't think there is 100% like either or. I think it comes down to what kind of author you want to be and what you have time for. Because I know some people who believe their craft is 100% good as it is where they're at. Whether or not they can improve, that's their decision. But they actually enjoy marketing more. So they're like, okay, it makes writing easier for me if I know I'm going to aim at this baseline. But I actually enjoy marketing. Maybe they're naturally more inclined to it. And it still works for them. They have full-time livings. They're really good. They can push their books out faster. And I know people who are focused on the craft side too, where they're like, I don't want to market to the extreme, but they produce books just as fast, but they produce maybe more experimental books, and one catches on and it brings them their fan base that checks out their other stuff. There's a writer, like there's, I guess, no right or wrong to either. But where I fell was I feel most consistently happy and ability to work better if I'm trying new projects that push something in mind. And I come from writing urban fantasy more often. So my backlist is actually shorter books that are faster, shorter chapters, first person, very noir, tense, clipped prose. It's fast, it's staccato, it hits you hard. And I've always loved lyrical writing, and I used to write poetry and songs. And I thought this could be a really cool way, in addition for me to explore the mythology and do the commentary I wanted, to also push my craft and specifically try to get better just at this. And I know I definitely did by writing the first book. And the second, I got to get even better, because I could go back to the first one and see what I could critique, because I do believe in rereading your own work, as hard as it is, because you can see your own weak points to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, because in a book this big and in a world this vast and the type of story it is, it would be so easy to just info dump. Like, it would be so easy to fall into that just because the type of story it is. But yeah, I was just, I think it's great how you've done it. Yes, you Smolder. The second book goes into those details. Ronnie's going to ban us for showing up at his interviews. You can try. Question to Mr. Virdi. You got the framing narrative consistently moving along with the nested tales. How challenging was that to write?
Good question.
Well, I'm a pantser, but because of that, I think by this point, at least, it's easier for me to do it with a story like this, because I've had so much practice previously pantsing single narratives that don't have the framing device. So the way I was able to think about it in my head is that each, the past and the present timeline have to have their own arcs. And as long as I have those, I know what nesting stories I can do between them when I'm allowed to. And that's more internally based on my sense of pacing of, okay, this is a moment here where I can insert this nesting story. I know it's relevant, and it will first function as a nesting story itself, which is entertaining. So it's not going to slow the pacing. It'll offer something I feel the story needs right now that I can build off of later, or can be a reward for this point in time right here. And then I can continue with the pacing. And I know, I guess it's more like a copy editor trick, but I know when to end certain arcs in like the past or present storyline that feels like a cliffhanger, but it's not. And it keeps you wanting to read to the transition to either get back to that point or to get back to the past story, either or. Because he is performing it as he's performing it to you. So there is sort of this idea that Ari's in on the fact he might be cliffhangering you, because he wants you coming back to the performance. It was written that way, which is why it's past and present. Both story points are told in first person from Ari, rather than a third person maybe in the present and then a past first person in the past. It's first person consecutively through until it's Eloine's story, and then it's third person present.
I think that was done really well, because for me, the bits that I love the whole story, don't get me wrong, but I love context. I love backstory. So when we were going back to Ari's backstory, I was like, I want this. I want all of this. And then he would cut you off, and you would go into present day.
Interlude. The interlude. You knew you were coming to do it because it'd be the interlude. And I kind of love
Yeah.
that. And I don't know if you've done it on purpose, but for me, it's like when you called it the interlude, it's like the interlude to a play.
Hmm.
Like it's like an
Oh,
intermission,
absolutely. It is
like
100% theater
yeah, is that how
structured.
you
Yeah.
meant it? Yeah, yeah, because
Yep.
that was
Because
like
in
right,
book
okay,
two,
Space
there's
Little
even
Brit.
lines about that
Oh,
where Ari will say like, when Eloine leaves him one point, he's like, exit stage left, songstress, like remain here, Ari. And there's theater cues there because in the first book we establish his life is he wanted to be an aspiring theater performer,
yeah,
an actor on stage, not even originally a
yeah,
storyteller. And slowly he starts morphing within the first book to storytelling instead. When he meets Mati, when he realizes he can still perform and act in a different way. And we realize that he's never really become an actor. Even in present day, he's ended up a traveling storyteller. He's not part of a
Hmm.
group
yeah,
of players. He is a different kind of performer. And there's reasons for that. And it's encapsulated in his life. The way Eloine's chapters are narrated, they're not Ari. It's almost like she's being narrated by an omniscient narrator, like on stage, if she was a silent player. Because it's third
Hmm.
person and it's present tense.
yeah,
So there's a lot of like hidden theater cues. I mean, the romantic climax of book one was a masquerade for the West, but it was also a Bollywood number if you compare it to the East, where it was a
Hmm.
giant dance number in Tanya, and then the two romantic characters have that one moment under the starlight where they kiss. So I got to do
yeah,
both. Like depending on what lens you look at it, if it's the West, it's either an Italian or Spanish masquerade, and if you're looking at it from the Indian side, it's a Bollywood number. So there's a lot of
Hmm.
also film and other narrative structure cues and little nesting secrets and fun things all throughout the story too.
that's great.
I have to ask, you've just said that you're a pantser, right? And this whole
Yeah,
book is there's so much thought clearly that has gone into it. We read a series ages ago. We read the Rune of Kings series, and we joked that Gen Lions needed a murder board to keep track of everyone. Now this seems like that sort of book as well. How do you pants something with this much thought and passion in it?
Okay, so this goes to something that I learned from Butcher, which is he has something called a spook, which is situation, protagonist, objective, obstacle or opponent, and climax. And I've already done that. It's about 2 sentences in my head for the whole series, so I know how it's supposed to end. And I do one for every book in my head, and I can even write it down. Like book one, I need to accomplish these main things for the present day and past. Now I
Mm-hmm.
have essentially a very loose outline in my head, and then it's what key beats do I think are cool and I want to mythologically reference, which some of those are built up on my nesting stories. And I actually write those down by hand. So it's like not outlining, but I've created so many key beat moments of I want to use this mythology. I know I'm going to do this character arc. Okay, so if I started the book and I committed to this, I have to complete X, Y, and Z to get there. And after
Mm-hmm.
that point, because I've completed X, Y, and Z, I can keep building off of that. Pantsing is mostly, I still think, reliant on the exact same structures that outliners do. You just don't completely commit to telling it on paper. And I've actually
Mm-hmm.
talked to
yeah,
Jen Lyons, we're friends, and she does this exact same thing where if you already outlined the story, you've already told it. And for some people, that's motivation not to write it.
yeah,
I am one of those people where when I first started, I actually outlined all the time. I never finished an outlined book. The first book I finished was when I had to pants, and I still study structure religiously. So I know what I'm doing. I just am leaving myself space to go, oh, this is a cooler idea. And I know I still
yeah,
need to get to this main story point. I can change this. I cannot change that. So I can do this cool arc instead of how we get there.
Mm.
yeah.
That makes sense. Kind of
I think this is referring to the
your
avatar.
avatar.
Yeah.
There is no war.
Yeah.
Does that mean each book will be next level? Will we see the final book as like Super Saiyan or the
I
Golden
hope so.
Saiyan?
Oh, God, no. Something I really believe in and I like and I want time to. We'll see what happens with book three and then if I get renewed, which I'm praying, is to have more time between books of this scope to write them because I
Mm-hmm.
want to improve. So something I did when I was indie was if I was writing a series, I'd actually take a really tiny break between like books two and three or something, and I'd write a new book that was completely different that pushed me in a different way, like maybe practicing opening hooks for each chapter or a certain narrative style or voice. So when I wrote the next book back in that series, I was better
Mm.
for it, and people could see that.
Yeah,
I don't ever want like if I can control it, I don't want there to be a point where like book four is as good as book three. I want each book to be better in some way. I don't know if
Mm.
objectively every book will feel better completely as a narrative because I know there's some people who like their favorite book in like Wheel of Time is book three, The Dragon Reborn. Other people it's the next one, book four, Shadows Rising, and it's never like each book is better. And for
Mm.
some it
yeah,
can be, I want to at least try for that. I know I
Mhm.
can't control the outcome and reception, but I feel like it's a good goal. Like what I would love to have is these books are one book every 2 years because of their size. I'd
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
to move to what Sanderson does, where Stormlight I think is one book every 3 years. If I get renewed, just so I can write these to be even better, and in between write new stuff because
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
on the faster side. My backlist is like 10+ books that are indie. I could do a book or two a year. This is actually slow for me, but I need the stability and like a regimented schedule and things worked out with
Yeah.
publishers to make sure like everyone's okay with everything I want to do. And hopefully that will
Mm.
make me better as I keep going.
I
Yeah.
think that's a really good way to kind of the man, the myth, the legend. I think
Both
that's a
great.
really good way to kind of look at writing because a lot of I know the plan for this series is for it to be larger than a trilogy, but the problem that I have with a lot of trilogies is that they suffer from middle book syndrome. So it almost seems as though you've got your first book, there's a lot that happens. The second book is like a traveling book, or for some reason you have to get to the point that the author has decided is going to happen in
Mhm.
that third book, and then the second book just kind of feels a bit like, meh, okay, I read it, great, but I didn't love it. And I think that idea of
Right.
like constantly trying to push yourself to do stuff and to improve is fantastic because
Yeah.
we all get into a rut. We all do it,
Yeah.
regardless of whether you're a writer or an artist or anything. We can all do that. So the idea of actually being so kind of good at pushing yourself, I can't think of the word right now. It's really good. Have you always been like that, or is that something you've
I, I
developed?
I think so with writing I developed it. I don't think I was always like that, except for
Mhm,
in video games where I don't know if it ever paid dividends. Like I definitely grew up a gamer and I used to compete, but
mhm,
there was definitely a sense of reward in pushing myself with gaming. And I don't know if that comes from ADHD, because I do try to logic this. I'm curious about it. And I know with
mm,
ADHD, there is the whole the reward center metric of your brain where you chase
yeah,
rewarding things. And it's like I'm a huge fan of the From Software games for people who know, such Dark Souls, Sekiro, Elden Ring, which
mhm,
are very difficulty based and they're pattern based. So they actually reward players for getting better, and that's
yeah,
something I
Yeah.
actually took as a fun challenge where I know for a lot of the community at times it's a frustrating one. And
mm,
I do know with writing, I'm like that. Like one thing I did last year just to see if I could was I wrote a thriller or a crime novel just on the side under a new pen name to see if I could. And it's a very small novel. It's like 88,000 words, very tight, straight shot through. I did it. It's out on submission right now with my agent for sale. And I want to write a couple more of those. I'm on the side right now practicing writing a novella as if it were told like an epic poem. So the entire thing is in verse.
mm,
It's rhyming
Wow.
couplets, it's quatrains, and it's like if you were hearing an epic fantasy told in novella format that's performed, but you still get all the details. And I just want to see if I
mm,
can do it. I don't know if it's ever going to be publishable in that format, but maybe parts of it will come back to make a future Tremaine book better. Maybe it'll turn into a novel. I think like all practice has its use.
mm.
But
Do
I
it as
understand like
better as
this.
like little snippets of
Yeah.
like
Or
this
that.
is
Yeah.
my
Yeah. I could
extra
do that too.
writing, like this
Yeah.
is Ari telling you a little bit of a,
Yeah.
a bit of a poem.
Oh, absolutely.
That's incredible because obviously, me myself, the idea of I am also reward based. I like a reward.
Mm.
Usually, it's more
Just
books.
like a
Got to be
reward.
honest. Um, but that idea of the fact that you're just constantly pushing yourself to get better and to try new things as well. I think that's also really
Yeah.
admirable because a lot of people will just you write a fantasy or a sci-fi or whatever, you find what you like and you stick with it, and
Right.
you write what you read. You've mentioned Jim Butcher already. Is I'm guessing he's like one of your idols, all time favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. Jim's definitely a hero of mine. Probably the writing hero because I dedicated obviously a book one to him.
Yep.
And I've also been really fortunate to learn from him since about 2018 now. He's been my mentor. Um, so about 6 years now. And he's also someone I admire because the path of his career was definitely built up like long term. Like he had Dresden
Yeah.
Files, which was slowly building up. It wasn't an overnight success. I
Mm-hmm.
think, if I recall, he became full time after he sold the series rights for Codex of Alera, like the advance money from that, plus what Dresden was bringing in, let him go full time. But he was like on book 5 or 6 of Dresden, had to sell another series, and he just kept building his way up. And he's very craftsman oriented on his books. In fact, I forget where, but there's an interview where Brandon Sanderson said that he regards Jim Butcher as like the only author who's ever written a bad book. And Jim's very much on the craft oriented track, and you can see it through his books and his experimentation. Like, he's got urban fantasy with Dresden, he has epic fantasy with Codex of Valera, and now he has a steampunk series with the Cinder Spires. Like, he'll push genre, he'll try different stuff out, different craft techniques, and I actually really like that, because my backlist is like that too. It's kind of all over the place, and I don't want to stop. Like, my favorite genre to write is actually contemporary fantasy, which I haven't published any of. Ironically, my life's just been weird. So stuff more like Neil Gaiman and you know, I guess Deborah Harkness, The Magicians, stuff like that.
Yeah,
It's really funny. I haven't gotten there yet. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's still plenty of time.
Yes.
See, you have to excavate these things hidden among the 800 plus pages because Ronnie had to be sneaky. We'll be sure to get back to watch the vid. I hope everything goes
I hope
okay
your
with
dog's alright,
Diesel.
Bo.
Yeah. I'm still trying to process that you wear a pants at all these Easter eggs, all the hidden things. Just how?
So I will admit, when I come up with an Easter egg, I do at least write that down in the document. So I don't know if that counts as outlining, but if I come up with an idea like, oh, I want to do this, while I'm actually typing in Microsoft Word the book, I just put like a bracket, like save for later, like this idea. When I get to a scene for it, I'll put it back in. So I don't lose them, but I do come up with them a lot on the fly. Like, okay, because I've committed to this scene. Because I also edit while I go, which is, I think, more common for many pantsers. But if you know you're doing something cool in the present, sometimes you can go back and just change a few things in a previous chapter, and it all adds up, and it looks like it was perfectly planned. Like, it's just that kind of thing. But I mean, it exists in every format, actually. If you look, like Lil Wayne and Jay-Z don't pre-write their songs. They just go in and they freestyle. Certain cooks are the exact same way too, where once you get like a culinary basis of cooking and you go through your schooling, you can just freestyle cook. And I always thought that was fascinating. Like, there is that delineation of, like, I don't want to say left or right brain, but like pantsing and outlining or planning and going off the cuff seems to exist in a lot of arts. And I just think it's a natural, maybe where someone is like on a spectrum of ADHD to something else, or however their brain works, from motivation to planning adjacent. And I think it's one of the things that makes the arts actually really cool, because you can have really structured certain kinds of stories, and you can have pants ones that both have the same effect on people. And it's just how you get there and how people's creative processes are unique to them and make them, which then shows back up in the work.
So, one of the questions I had was, what is your least favorite part of the writing process? Do you have one?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Either starting back up again if you fall into a rut, or the second it becomes publishing stuff, which is bad, because like that's how you make money, is once you get published. But I hate the publishing pipeline, whether it's indie or traditional. I don't like that whole series of now let's get it ready to like become a packaged product. It's like, I just need to go work on the next thing, please. But the hardest thing for me, I think with ADHD, is to start. Once I start, it's easy to get into a routine every day. Startings are hard because I am obsessive. I try, and this does not matter, but I do obsess over hooks and like perfect openings. Every book, I practice hooks for fun. Like, I wrote one book just off of the hook. No man could truly enjoy his drink with a gun pressed to his side, and it was a space western that I wanted to write, kind of like a neo-noir thriller also. And I sat there forever agonizing about that line, and I was like, oh, it's a good line. Like, someone just trying to enjoy their drink, and immediately there's a gun at their side. Okay. And that's what always hangs me up. Like, I need to have like the perfect opening, and it takes more time than it should. But once I have that, it's easy for me to get into it. But I hate starting a book. I wish I could already have started it, and then it's just go. That's it. Just get the opening out of the way for me, and that's it.
No, I can understand that, especially if like it's once you got something to focus on, then that thing where it's like you start thinking of something, especially if you are a perfectionist and you want to make sure you get it right. And like you said, you edit as you go, don't you? So it kind of like feels a bit more pressured doing it that way.
Yeah.
Are you the same with reading? as well as writing, in the sense that like once you've started you can concentrate, or are you more because I'm more of a I will start book after book after book because I love the start of the book, and then the rest of it sometimes just takes me a while
Yeah.
to commit to.
I'm actually the same with reading, especially this year. I don't know if it's world events or what's catching up with me, or I know a lot of people are just burned out with everything. It seems like the world is a dumpster fire at times. I've been having a hard time reading books even I love for fun. Like I'm constantly getting new books that are fascinating research, and right now it's been easier for me to read nonfiction than fiction, which is the first time in my life that's ever been the case. Studying used to be really work, and I'm finding it really hard to read what I love, and I don't know why these days. I'm actually trying to figure that out. Like I'm slogging through one of my favorite series of all times, and I love it. It's just I keep finding excuses just not to pick it back up right now. Like I'll read it tonight, later. I'm saving it, and I don't know why. But like I could read this entire research about 17th century piracy, and it's all nonfiction, and that's more engaging to me right now. But I don't know why, because it never used to be. It used to be work. Like that was only research, and
that's actually really interesting. Because like I would love to say that I'm the same, and nonfiction. I read loads of it, but for me, it's easier to watch Bob's Burgers than it is to.
Miss 22, was it still 22 books are you currently reading?
Yep, I love. I am a sucker for starting a new book. Don't ask me why.
Oh, have you finished Snowboard yet?
No, I'm sorry after that.
When we first became friends.
We don't talk about that anymore. We don't talk about that.
When we first became friends, we wanted to do a buddy read of Illborn. And I was behind for ages. And then all of a sudden, like, I was like, all right, I've almost finished. She's like, yeah, I'm still on page 400. And I finished it. This was 2 years ago. She still hasn't finished the book from 2 years ago.
I mean, you came for the buddy read and you stayed for the charisma. What can I say?
Oh, we've got some more comments.
I'm glad it's not just me, though.
The talk of pants is hilarious, since that's a slang British insult, as I'm sure both interviewers know. How do you pants are? You can give
I mean, it's a different context, really, because it's like, oh, that's pants.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get that.
When is the romantic novel coming out? Oh, I don't like that phrase.
And will it be spicy?
Whenever I can get the legal chance to do so. I do actually have a Eastern mythology inspired romantasy that I was just batting around with a friend, because I again, it's another challenge. I think the genre is beautiful and it touches on things. Yes, it will be very spicy. I actually think it might be too spicy for traditional publishing, so we'll see. Because I don't know where the boundaries with that is. But I also, this is something I've talked about. Romance especially is a fantastic genre for authors to study, like every author, because no genre does character arcs better. No genre does emotional arcs better. That's what romance promises, in fact. Romance promises the greatest emotional cathartic arc for your resolution, because your resolutions for climaxes aren't usually externally goal-based. They're usually an emotional catharsis that's achieved. And the first binding has some of those as well. There are emotional payoff arcs instead of accomplishing something rather than necessarily defeating a big bad guy. Same with the second book at times. Yeah. And every genre has something that I feel authors can benefit from. Like thrillers have the best pacing. Crime novels focus specifically on why certain socio-political events happen. So there's a lot of introspection in them, more modern day commentary on the world around you, politics and how they influence lives. And classical fantasy and epics actually used to do that too. I know people are like, get the politics out of SFF. But historically, if you go back and look at the old epics, they were talking about stuff at their time too. Usually family, societal relationship with the gods, the idea of fate or burdens. The wealth inequality was talked about in a lot of those. There are cartoons throughout time of depictions of these. As soon as we got advanced, like the 19th century had tons of socio-political cartoons and magazines and newspapers, and that goes all the way back, that commentary. So I think, like, for example, studying crime novels tells you things that characters might want to discuss in a fantasy novel, because people are always going to have problems and they're going to want to discuss them. And throughout human history, a lot of our problems have been the same, whether it's like wealth issues, class inequality, othering another group as a scapegoat. That's happened throughout history so much. Like it's going to happen in fantasy. And we see it, for example, in Game of Thrones. That's just a giant socio-political fantasy with dragons. but a lot of the problems in it are just human problems, minus the White Walkers. Up until they show up, all the problems in the realms are just human problems, from greed,
Yeah.
avarice, wealth inequality, societal hierarchy, and classism. That's all it is, leading to everyone murdering and stabbing each other.
Yeah.
And it creates
Yeah.
this great story of conflict. But yeah, so that's essentially why I wanted to write a romantic because I'm like, it'll probably make me better at certain arcs and certain commentary stuff, and I guess write spicy stuff, because I have tons of friends who at this point are daring me to do it. So it's like, okay, well, at some point.
But I mean, you do get like the because obviously Ari is sullied, isn't he? So you've got that whole like how he's treated there, and
Mm.
I mean, you immediately feel for him as soon as you mention that, because you're just like, that's not fair. So you're immediately on his side, even if you're like, along the way it might feed into some of the rumors and get a bit carried
Yeah,
away and too clever. He's
yeah,
far too clever for his own good.
yep,
Mm.
yep,
But you still back him all the way, like,
hmm
because you know where he's come from and you know that he's not had an easy life. And
hmm
like for me, I'm a sucker for, like a like growing from the coming from the ground up. Like, you've not had everything
hmm
handed to you. Like,
Mm.
he's been through some serious crap and he's made his, and he's not gone the way that he wanted to. But where we end up in the end of book one, it's kind of like he has still grown as a person, for better or worse. You will find out, but he has definitely grown, and despite any mistakes that he might make, you still want the best for him, don't you? You're just like, oh.
Always.
You said you once had a vision for connected mythos-based storytelling. Is this possible? For example, Sanderson as a Cosmere, but to do that based on myths and stories.
Yes, and book two actually opens up some of that. It starts getting into, I guess, what would be my Cosmere. They're called the Principalities, which I do officially introduce in book two. And I want to use overarching myths, and Tales of Tremaine is sort of the most overt entry into that. And hopefully, as I get to do more other stuff, I get to talk about a giant metaverse that I'm doing through mythology and stories instead. Similar to the idea how in many myths, like the Norse, South Asian, for example, even the Greek, they're the ideas of other worlds. So yeah, in the Norse, you have Yggdrasil, the world tree or the cosmic tree, and you have different realms. South Asian mythology, you have a similar world tree, a cosmic tree. It exists in a few mythologies that come out of the Proto-Indo-European cultures, and in it there are 14 realms, or what are known as lokas. And I just want to play with this idea and sort of introduce at least the theory in book two in class to Ari, that maybe their world isn't the only world, that maybe their galaxy or universe or all that they know isn't the only one, and maybe that there's more out there. And it gets into a very pseudo just referential thing of, here's how it would work, here's what we think. And then Ari asks the question, it's like, well, what if there's more out there? And he doesn't really get
Mm.
the answer to that. And it is something I'm trying to tackle my own way, because I look at story creation as sort of something that's still in evolution from the history of it. It's this perpetual thing of just stories beget stories. So I thought it would actually be cool if in fiction I create a metaverse done through storytelling and myths, because that's kind of how we've gotten to where we are with storytelling. And a lot of
Yeah.
our world and culture and religions come from myths. Like mythology is cultural stories wrapped around a religion, which are different than folklore and fables.
Mm.
Those are different. Those can be removed from religion. Like Johnny Appleseed is a folktale, but he's not intrinsically tied to American religion. It's a cultural tale. It's a folk
Yeah.
tale, and you can have the separation between the two. And I thought that could be really cool to focus on, of not just how to build one world, but how do you build a metaverse done that way. Whether I get to
That
do it or
sounds
not,
really
traditionally
interesting.
published, is we'll see. That's but
Sounds like something I definitely want to read. It bogged my mind, but I think I'd be up for it. Can you share your pen name for your secret romances you're writing?
yes, it was chosen by a bunch of author friends. These group of very nice ladies got together and pretty much created it for me and demanded that I can't use any other name anyways. There's a beautiful writing group in which, if you're familiar with Publishing Rodeo, the two creators are also in it. They came out of that. And
Mm.
some of the ladies in the group decided that if I ever do this, I must go by R.R.Virdi to keep the R and then the little nod
Oh,
to romance. Yeah.
I love
So
it.
if I ever get to do this, I am gonna have to use that, because I promised them I would.
I love that.
So
Right, I'll be on the lookout for that. More importantly, does the romanticer use the phrase
oh,
smolder? You're gonna have to slide that in somewhere.
I'm sure it will, because I did want to do some stuff with fire etymology as well from a cultural standpoint and mythological one. And I know I've used the words in the first binding and the Doors of Midnight just because, again, it's very well associated with coals, with fire and ember. And I did it without thinking that it would be used against me like this. So I'm sure it's going to happen regardless. So yes.
It's gonna be brought up every time now. Every time you do it, you're gonna have a smouldering main character that's a male, aren't you? You're gonna have to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I believe this is the principalities, although we like to refer it as to the Verdiverse.
Well, okay, I didn't know.
I love
That's
that.
awesome too.
Yeah,
Aw.
that's what it's called now. Did
Oh
he
my
already
God.
write another unrelated book after Doors of Midnight? What is this superpower?
I know. Some
Yes,
people read incredibly fast. You write incredibly fast.
I have the thriller that's out. Hopefully it sells because I could also use the advance money. That'd be a really nice universe. I have 10 chapters of a standalone South Asian fantasy that I want to sell, hopefully, and get out. It's inspired sort of by the Portuguese Inquisition into Goa and Karela. So it's a secondary world. I'm not using actual Portugal. It's just a fantasy empire that's very naval based. And they take over an aspect of a secondary world, kind of like India, not. And it has to do with social revolution inspired by a dynastic monk order instead. So kind of V for Vendetta, kind of a lot of revolutionary stories and people's uprising with a very socio-political sailing tradition conquest fantasy. And I thought that could be really cool as a standalone. Very soft magic system that has to do with making bargains with nature spirits. And I want to sell that. I only did 10 chapters because I didn't know if I'd get to sell it or not. So I have enough for a sample to hopefully have the discussion with my publishers with when that time pops up.
Nice, that sounds good. Also, a subreddit, Verdiverse.
I did not know about that. Wow.
And interviews outlets are collectively in my head as the smolder sessions.
Oh my God.
We can make that a hashtag.
Oh my God, hashtag Verdiverse, hashtag smolder sessions.
Oh, I did write a short story. Oops, I wrote a novelette this year. I forgot about that.
Oops,
so, yeah, Grimdark Magazine was super sweet to do a South Asian fantasy collection, and they gave me my story, the cover for it. It was called Reed Lions, which is secondary world again, and it's kind of like a march of band of brothers in war who are very tired. There's a beautiful plot twist I don't want to spoil, but it was also inspired by the history of Sikh soldiers on the front lines in World War I and World War II that people don't know about a lot in world history, at least Americans don't know about. Maybe I'm assuming the British might be better taught about it because they served for the British forces at that time during the colonization, and they were used as cannon fodder. So it's sort of following. Yeah. And it was really cool because they got to feature it's the first time in Western history for an SFF magazine or even publisher to feature Punjabi turban wearing Sikhs on the cover of a fantasy. So we got to do that. It made some history, quiet history, and I did write that this year. I forgot about that. There's also a Ari novella that takes place between the end of book 1 and book 2 that's done with a Shola short story. So POV of his cat, sort of like Ari's winter break, and then his cat gets a winter break story. And I'm writing the novella for Krisham on the side. That's going to be free. I just haven't finished all the stories. I'm slowly doing that, and my goal is around book 3, hopefully, or before, have that out for all the readers to just have like a free, like a thank you, because people like you two and so many booktubers and readers have like made the series succeed through all the kindness and support it's gotten, which has been wonderful. And I kind of wanted to create something that could give back, and again, practice something. So it's sort of like a mental health collection of stories. So Ari meets an orphan boy who's being bullied. Without giving the whole story away, he helps him, and for the first time, maybe he builds someone else's legend rather than his own. So he builds up a legend for this little kid to protect him. And then Ari's cat's POV, Shola, is similar, where the cat adopts a starving orphan for like the winter break and helps them. And then the third story will be following Krisham, who is the only person in the crow's nest who's not confined to a room. He's not locked up. He has a little office. That's the entryway. And the whole story is, why is this one kid who has a magical version of DID, or dissociative identity disorder. How come he's not locked up? And you follow his whole adventure in a week of what he gets up to. It's a very touching story about the other kids who are locked up and what goes on in their lives when everyone forgets about them because they're sort of incarcerated.
Yeah.
So it's all about different mental health stuff and suffering and kindness are the themes of those little stories that are going to be bundled up to be given away.
That's so
Oh, that'd be
cool.
so
That's
cool.
something else I wrote. I forgot about
The
that. Yeah,
introduction of
I'm really
Shola.
bad at remembering. Yeah.
The introduction
Yeah.
of Shola was just adorable. Like, he reluctantly took this cat on and he's like, do you know what? I might as well just keep it now. Like, he was
Yeah.
so
Yep.
adamant. This is not my cat. This is not my cat. Oh, okay, it's
Yeah.
my cat.
That was the hardest stuff. For book 2, I had to cut a lot of Shola stuff, which sucked. But they're like, can we just not have so much cat? And I was like, but everybody loves the cat. And they're like, I know, but can we not have so much? I was like, all right, fine. There were 70,000 words cut from book 2, and I think a good chunk of that was also cat stuff. There was a lot of little cat adventures and cat silly stuff, but it happens.
Oh, we do love the cat stuff though.
So they can have their own book. Just a whole book.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Tales of Shola.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you said that you've indie published or traditionally published. What made you choose the traditional route for this one? This, like,
okay.
and then not into the others?
Part of that had to do with some level of ignorance. At the time when I was writing this, I first thought it was going to be indie published, and I was going to do it like a serialized story, like chapter by chapter, maybe on Patreon. And Audible and Tantor were both talking to me at the time about doing this like a radio play, like do a chapter every 2 weeks or something. Forget the original timeline, because it'd give them time to produce it, and it'd be done like Ari's performing it weekly for you. And I bumped into a tour editor. I didn't know he was a tour editor, and we just started talking about Wheel of Time, my influences, what I loved, and what I was trying to do with the story. So I gave him the whole pitch. At the end of it, he told me he was a tour editor, told me to submit the sample to him, which I did, and I didn't expect anything would happen. Like, it was tour, and I was an indie author, and this was still, indies hadn't broken through where what it is now, where you see a lot more of them being picked up from Amazon by publishers. And he gets back a month and a half later telling me to call him, and then Tor offered on the series. And I knew how big it was going to be, and I didn't think at the time I could produce this in print, because that actually mattered to me for this series. It didn't matter before, but for this particular one, I wanted to be able to hold it because there was a certain vision I was going for, and I wanted certain art through it, and I had a certain creative idea of what the finished product would look like. And Tor was the vehicle to help me do that when they came on board, because I didn't know you could publish a book that big indie at the time, because I hadn't been super clued into the Kickstarters, and the Amazon print limits at the time for paperback and hardcover were not even close to what this book was. I would have been off by a couple hundred pages and physically unable to print it. Now things have obviously changed, but I think this was the best path for this particular story to get it out there, and for my career to make this move. It's been odd because it's dominated so much of the past work, and that people, some of them only know me as a traditionally published fantasy author, which is funny because like I've been doing urban fantasy since 2013. Like, I still primarily panel on urban fantasy tracks when I go to conventions, which is like at Dragon Con. I have one fantasy panel, and the rest are all urban fantasy. Like, that's still what I'm known for in conventions. So it's been an odd like paradox of like I have an urban fantasy background. I teach that at panels and stuff, but I'm now known to readers more for fantasy.
Yeah,
that's quite interesting. Do you have a preference between indie and trad?
I think they both have their benefits. I think for me, traditional's been frustrating for the fact that I write really fast, and it actually gives me joy. There's a reason I've sacrificed so much for trying to be full-time, because it hasn't been easy. But it makes me happy. It genuinely does. Like, writing actually adds happiness to my life, the mechanical act of it itself. And it's frustrating not being able to write and sell books, because when you go traditional, at least for the first time, I don't know how it changes over your career. There are pretty restrictive non-compete clauses and first looks, and those have sort of tied my hands. And it's kind of annoying because I'd like to be able to write more books faster, just get them out, because I'm always studying, and that's what I want to do. I want to be writing. Like, if I wake up, let's say at 6, in 2 hours, I could do 2,000 words, which is steady. That's like the Stephen King number, what he teaches. It's doable. And if you think about 2 hours a day for your work, it's not actually a lot of work if you treat it like a job. That gives you plenty of time at night to do another 2 hours over the whole day. That's 4 whole hours of work. That's 2 books at 2,000 words a day, which over 2 months is 120,000 each book. That's 2 completed novels that are touching barely epic fantasy, but they're large enough for an urban fantasy, cozy, romantic, like multiple genres that fits in. You do it for 3 months, you're at 180,000. You now have an epic. Or you have 2 90K word books if you do your nighttime ones. Like, just being consistent in a regular minimum daily word count over a couple hours a day, half of a person's normal working day, can give you multiple books by the end of a year. And it can be frustrating not being able to sell them if that's how you make your living.
Yeah.
And indie, you could just put them out there. But I mean, there's a benefit to both. Like, traditional has raised my profile. It comes with the advance money. You're in bookstores, which is an extreme, volume increase, so people could see you and find you. I think for me, hybrid would be the best way, as long as I get to be cut loose, so I can just write all the things I want and experiment.
Yeah,
that'd make me happy at least. I'm probably not like a great businessman or writer to be saying that. Like, I just want to be let loose and let me write. Everyone else can deal with publishing my stuff. Yeah. I want to write, and I want to write really fast. So let me do it.
He spontaneously smoldered books into existence.
I wish I would have way more books done if that were the case, considering how many times people say I smolder. Just one book done every time he says
it. So Jim Butcher wrote Codex Alera based off Pokemon of the Lost Legion. What 2 random themes would you like to put together?
Oh, so I actually have this that was similarly a dare, and it was oh crap. How do I say it? So it was alcohol trade and alcohol brewing. So, because one of my friends is a microbrewer, and he wanted to see that in a fantasy, and The Godfather. So the idea, and I have the idea of how I'm going to mix them. I don't want to see it yet, but it's going to be alcohol brewing and the sale and trade of alcohol and The Godfather, which I have a series idea. I actually do want to sell and pitch this. So I can't say much. We'll see if I get to do it, but that would be it.
That sounds very intriguing.
Selling so booze and mobsters, which already go hand in hand. But
they do indeed.
I have something. Yes, I have something less contemporary, more actually epic fantasy in mind with that. And if I get to do it, it'll be great. We'll see. I don't know what Tor is going to take from me, because I think I'm already pissing off publishers, because we're in a paper crisis, and it's like Brandon Sanderson, who's big enough to warrant the paper, and then me, and I think we're using up all the paper, and I feel really bad about that.
Well, you've got to do it for the epic fantasy. You can't leave it hanging.
Yeah.
So what's your ideal writing environment? Early morning with a coffee and sunlight, or are you more inclined towards late nights and whiskey in a dim-lit room?
So both. If I had to pick, it'd actually be nighttime, but unfortunately so I actually help take care of my disabled dad right now. Sometimes I check in on him. That makes it really hard. I have to be a morning person, and I don't like mornings. I actually do like waking up early enough in the morning to write when no one else is awake. In my perfect world, I'd actually write as the last thing of the day when I'm winding down at night, because I really feel more mentally active at night, clearer. It feels like the morning day is all chores and stuff to get everything out of my ADHD brain way for nighttime, when I can really wake up. It's now just writing. One of my favorite passion things to do, if I had the time, would be to go out for late night drives. I love driving when the world is dark. I think the world's I live in the city, so it's different kind of beauty to me. I love the skyscrapers, the lights, the long roads, and I can also go very rural very easily. I'm only 45 minutes away from the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I would love to do that to clear my mind. I write sometimes in the car, just narrating to myself, and I'd love to do that and then come back home and start writing into the night. That'd be my favorite, or ride a motorcycle like that. But I don't have the luxury to do that right now. Ideally, one day, yes, I would be it. I would be a night owl, and I would be posting ridiculous stuff on Twitter while also writing at 1 a.m. and people would be like, why is this reprobate up at this time? I want people to worry about me in my sleep schedule.
Yeah, we'll be awake. We'll be reading all your books.
Yeah.
Is Ronnie going to be a rapper now too?
Oh God. But believe it or not,
Smolder.
I'm very fortunate to have friends in the music industry. One of them was super kind enough to actually blurb the first binding. He's a Grammy Award winning musician, and they've actually joked about me like we should start just start a rap career, because I've actually for fun I do send them like fantasy lyrics done up as like a battle rap just as jokes, and one day they were like, we should actually just start doing this, like we make you like an actual character and you actually perform these. And I don't know, part of me thinks one day I'd love to, just for like the memes, right? Just you live once, just do it just to be silly. Like I don't ever expect that to do well for me, right? But I can at least say I did it. Like I did it and it was fun and it was funny, and we just had a blast with it. No one took it seriously, but like it's a little check mark. I lived life. Yeah, I don't think I'm ever actually going to become a rapper.
I mean, you say that, and then all of a sudden you're like top of the charts.
All of a sudden,
like,
if that happens, I would stick with it. I'll admit that, because music pays way better than writing.
Well, potentially, there's a lot more sand and desertness involved if you go to Coachella.
There's that. Yeah.
I mean, as an introvert, I wouldn't like that. As an extrovert, you might enjoy it, like being on stage and
you have a whole new audience. More people for those I know R.R.Virdi badges.
Oh my god. That's been going on since like 2017, and in my defense, I did not start that. I don't know how that's endured to this point, and like it keeps going, and like it finds new people to start spreading it. It's like its own little COVID. I don't get it. I'm very flattered, by the way. I don't want to be dismissive. I am super like flattered and humbled by the people in there. And like, this is what I was talking about, why I'm so grateful and why I want to do the free stories, because it's been people like you in the reading community on the other side of authordom that have made all this possible, right? Like the word of mouth and kindness of people like you and the people who do the badges has done more than any marketing actually can, right? Like ad spending and stuff. It's been just the loveliness of actual people has made the book succeed, because I didn't know book one was doing that well in real life, because online it's really hard to tell, and you can't see real sales. And it wasn't until I got my royalties that I realized book one out earned in 4 months, and it had done fantastic, but because of readers, like people in the bookstores that I could not track buying that copy from Barnes & Noble, indie stores, or Amazon. There was no metric. Like you can't, I know people try to calculate Goodreads reviews and whatever, like if you have this many, it equals this. Like that wasn't true for my case, because I had heard that formula from some even big authors, and it was 100% true for them. But for whatever reason, when we got my actual sales, completely wrong, and the sales were dominating like everything that I thought I was supposed to be getting. So it's just been a really, really confusing thing.
I mean, I do have, because I bought the Broken Binding edition, I have that I know R.R.Virdi bookmark.
Right.
But I
can now say that I know R.R.Virdi.
Yeah, we've actually spoken to you.
I've actually spoken to him.
I also remember when you brought out book one, because I was really intrigued. Obviously, I've only recently read it, but I think that's an ongoing bookworms problem, isn't it? Like you've always got so many things that you want to read. But I remember when your book was releasing, and I was actually lucky enough to win one of your arcs that you'd hand signed.
Oh.
Yeah, it's on my shelf. Pride of place, actually. It's nice and safe.
Oh,
and cozy.
thank you so much.
But it's literally sat on my shelf, and to the point where it's just so amazing. I think there's something really special about receiving not only an arc, because obviously they're amazing, and I know a lot of people, there are some people who get loads of them or unsolicited arcs or something, but I think it's really special when an author, you had arcs, I don't know if they were spare or author copies or what, and you actually like personally signed them and doodled them and then offered them out to your readers. I thought that was so lovely, and I will say I did a happy dance when I got the tweet saying that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was super kind of also Golinks to help me facilitate. So we did have, I did take some of my author copies and stuff, because I was fortunate to get, for book one, I at least got a collection of my own arcs, and I thought it'd be really nice if I could do stuff. And I talked to my publishers, and they also said they would help me. So like I could mail them here and then mail them back to Golinks, because I didn't know how international mail would work for me. And this was in the middle of the because 2022, when we were getting to launch, there was still enough of the pandemic stuff going on. I'm like, are people going to be freaked out if a random author sends this versus my publisher? Like, is there mail concern with, like, can people get infected through packaging? I didn't know. I'm not a biologist. I had no idea how virulent COVID still was. And I was like, okay, if I send it to you guys, through official capacity, my publisher, can you handle this? And I picked the winners, and they were like, yeah, they were super sweet. And again, it was just like a thank you to everybody because like I said, I've been really fortunate from public support with just lovely people making the series successful. Like book 2 seems like it's gone down wonderfully as a storm, which means hopefully it further out earns me in my contract, meaning it more likely for my publishers to buy books 4, 5, and 6, which is the goal. So it's the least I could do for readers.
Yeah.
Honestly,
And it
I'm
all
so
helps, doesn't
excited.
it? And obviously, it seems as though from everyone that has shown up to these comments, at least, you have got a wonderful little support collective that will happily go and stand outside of your publisher's doors and say, we want more books.
The Smolder Squad.
Yeah.
We should make that a hashtag as well.
Smolder Squad.
Oh no! I mean, I run with. At this point, there isn't anything I can say that like yeah. I have to be grateful for it. Like the support I've gotten, even with Smolder Squad, it's just been absolutely brilliant and lovely.
This is a great video to watch whilst writing. Thank you, Hattie.
Aw.
You made Lisa cry. He did make me cry. I was like, oh, this is a really cool character-driven story. I don't think there's going to be at any point in this story when I'm going to cry. And I'm just like, because Chels knows, I cry at everything. I am such an emotional person. I'm such a soppy person. And I got to, I was like 50%, 60%, 70% through. I was like, I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to get through one book in my entire life where I've not cried. And then it was like, it must have been about the 85%. And I was like, he made me cry.
Yeah, also, like, when you were messaging, she was texting me, like, going, oh, this has made me cry. And the specific point of which made her cry, I was like, really? But it makes sense because you're such an empath.
But it had me in my feels because, like, I just felt like the feeling, and then I was just like, oh, I don't like this, and then the tear came, and I was like, okay.
Oh.
But it wasn't like, I don't know. It was just kind of like one of those quiet cries. You're just like, I don't. But you know, people go through a lot in this book, and even though it's not like massive battles and epic drama, it's very. His life is pretty hectic, and he goes through a lot, and then you just feel it. Do you know what I mean? And I like Chels said, I'm very much an empath, and it got to a point where like. I don't know. Maybe I just needed to cry that day. I don't know, but I was just like, oh,
too much.
That hit me. She's like, you are a softie, aren't you? And I'm like, I know.
Yeah, you are.
That's something I also wanted in the book. Not necessarily the cry, but there are those scenes. But the idea, something Jim Butcher also told me was that if you've ever gone through anything hard in life, or you have certain neurodivergent and mental struggles, that a lot of times when you write someone that's going to come through, and in those moments you're speaking another language to people who've also gone through similar events, and they may need that part of the story as that catharsis to let that out or process it or go, and they can get through their feelings in that moment, and that's what usually makes something resonate with them. So a lot of those moments are in a book like this. There's a lot of moments for surcease or to break down and have that cry, because Ari does go through a lot of ups and downs through life. And it offers people that space for people who've gone through somewhere similar to at least emotionally resonate, and whether they need to process something or not, they can at least understand that moment and allow themselves the space to feel that, because that's what a lot of genre fiction is about. Horror, for example, is the ability to confront horror in a safe setting. You can watch your character go through it and succeed and have that emotional catharsis with them, but you're safe behind the screen as a reader, but you can still process those emotions. It's why horror actually weirdly sells really well when the world is in a bad place, because people can safely confront the bad stuff in the world in a horror novel. Just as at the same time, an escapism novel sells really well. Like right now, the world's really crazy and cozy novels are blowing up. They both offer similar things in a different way. One offers the escapism for everything to be safe. The other offers the ability to confront the hard things. But that's what the promise of the genre is telling you before. Do you want fun escapism? Do you want to confront this? Do you want maybe a heartening romance? And that's really all genre fiction is. You're just promising the emotional experience that you want for a reader to have, with the tropes and everything inside of it as how you get them along that path.
Yeah. When Lisa said she cried at the Facebook, it definitely made me bump the book up my TBR.
That's so sweet of you.
Oh, what? Why? Walkers aren't real. Book 2 had the "this is part of something bigger" vibe, and I agree. I'd really want to read that.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
glad that came
let's
off.
get him
It
signed
was
for another 3
I
books.
wanted. Oh god, that'd be great. I have the titles for at least what it's worth. I know like my editors were frowning when I first showed them that. Like I was like, here are the titles for like the first 10 to 12 books, and they were like, why we like they were just like, okay, like a little pat on the head. They're like, oh, let's just do the first three. I was like, yeah, I know, but like here's what I'm gonna do in book 4, here's book 5, here's book 6. Like, we don't need this right now. And I was like, I know, but I have it, so I don't want to lose it. So I actually go to there's entire email threads with my editors are like 42 emails long. It's just me info dumping. Like, here's why this scene in book 2 is important because we'll come back to book 4 and book 5, and you can tell them going like, they're like, that's nice.
Nice. We haven't paid for that yet. We haven't agreed to
Yeah.
it.
But
I love that. That would be me though.
yeah,
That's me with like because me and Chels run indie book tours,
mhm,
and that is very much me. Like as soon as an idea comes into my brain,
Oh god, yeah.
I have to say it. I'm like, Chels, I know this is probably not a for a now thing, but I really like this idea. She's like, okay, that's great, but step back. Like maybe we'll look at that in a couple of months' time, and like in the future, I'm like,
right,
yeah, but it was in my head. I need to tell you. And then there are just messages where I've been like, ooh, this would be so good, and she's like, yep, not for now, but
Not
yeah.
for now.
aw,
Yeah, I will wear the hat of party pooper, but at the same time, it's realism because we
right,
have so
yeah,
many ideas, and it's like we don't do this full time. I wish we did, but we don't. So
It
we
would
need
be
to
good.
right,
go outside and breathe
It's
and see
like we
people.
both have full-time jobs and families outside of this,
Yeah,
so this is just all just a hobby to us. And I'm just like, yeah, we could do this,
right,
we could do this, we could do this. It's like, yes.
we could one day.
Maybe
Just
one day.
not.
Like, but
That's
it's an idea.
right.
it is.
He smoldered smolderingly across the room.
Oh,
Adam, we have told you about the subreddit, Ronnie. I'm gonna find this subreddit. I want to know what's on it.
Tinfoil theory.
Tinfoil theory. Verdi, Sanderson, and Tchaikovsky. A part of a secret storytelling trinity that keeps publishing books and readers can't catch up.
Oh, I know that
I
feeling.
wish I'd love to have their contractual ability to do so. Like I would love to write like them. I generally believe they are doing some great stuff for fiction, not just with their works, but how
Mm.
productive they are. Because I think I'm hoping it's going to force traditional publishing to be more open or flexible to catering to those
Yeah.
kinds of schedules. Because readers are voracious. Like they will wait for an author who needs a few years to finish a book, and they'll also buy authors coming out. I
Mhm.
think there's a scared mentality in publishing, which is kind of annoying. But I think it's also a minority where people think that authors don't finish books. But when you actually look at the list, it's like 4 or 5 in the history that have taken more than 4 or 5 years. And that's not to condemn them either. I know life and stuff happens, but overall, the actual
Yeah.
math is most authors finish. The unfortunate math of that is most authors don't get to finish because sales, lack of marketing, contractual
Yeah.
obligations mean they might not finish a trip. If it's more than 3 books, they don't get renewed. But in terms of
Mhm.
actually turning in contracted material, most actually finish overwhelmingly. But I know that there's the whole we don't want to read an author like until the series is done. But there's that weird cycle if that's how it gets done. And I think
Yeah.
Sanderson and
Yeah.
Tchaikovsky are helping to break against that and maybe comfort more readers in I guess the regularity of what publishing can allow. Because being
Yeah.
indie, I know authors can produce very fast. I know some people producing a book every month, which is
Yeah.
staggering, and I worry about them because a few I know who used to do that actually burned out. But
Yeah.
I mean, to each their own. But I would love to be part of those other two. Like, yeah, just being allowed to, okay, book done, send to publisher, let's go through it, let's get it out. Cool. I'm halfway done with another one now.
Yeah.
Like
That's
with
the goal.
Tchaikovsky though, he transcends genres as well. And so I've read a couple of his sci-fi ones, but he also does fantasy, which I've not dived into yet. But the fact that he does both, and I've met him at a blogger brunch with Tor before, and he talks about how a bit about his schedule and stuff like that. And I think being an author in general, like I have so much respect for authors, but when someone can literally just switch the brain from like a sci-fi to a fantasy
Mm.
and like keep it all on track, and it's just like you are machines, and I could literally think of a beginning, middle, and end for a book and it would be about 5 pages. I don't know how someone has the brain capacity to fill out like all that storytelling. It's
Part of that
absolutely
is
mad.
craft, though. Like it's what I believe in personally is that like I do like to romanticize writing, and I think that's just part of the history and tradition being romantic because it's one of the romantic arts. But at the same time, I do believe it's a craft, no different than like blacksmithing. Like the more you work at it and the more you experience and try, the more practice and better you get with being able to handle all those. If you acclimate yourself to whatever that is, so like a faster publishing schedule, you're not going to be able to immediately hit it. But over
Mm.
time, you might get better. You can muscle up your word counts. You can muscle up different aspects of your writing style. Like why I like changing genres in books so much is specifically because I also actually love prose. I don't necessarily love lyrical prose any more than noir prose. I just love the breadth of what prose can be, that it's this beautiful tool that's so malleable to tell any kind of story. So I like being able to tell a really clipped and noir staccato urban fantasy with the tough guy PI and a very different, very hard hitting voice to the beautiful lyrical. And that's one of my motivators, just how many different voices can I play with, which comes from my acting background. And someone else's motivation might be different, but this is a craft that lets you sort of learn and grow in every direction you want, whether you want to master more
Yeah.
structures, certain voice techniques. Maybe you just want to keep your structure, style, and voice the same, but you just want to get better at writing more books and just word count and sheer like punch through whatever X word counts you want. And that's all viable, and like you can practice and get there. Like, it is a craft.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of what Tchaikovsky got at too, with where he compartmentalizes different genres. For
Yeah.
me, it'd be the exact same way. It's actually easier for me to write two separate genres than two same genres because I'd be afraid of bleeding the voice from one into the other. Versus if it's
Yeah.
completely different, it's almost like you're doing two kinds of character models where, like you're method acting both of them in a way. You just become a different author for a moment. Like a morning I'll write a fantasy, and mornings all dedicated to like a fantasy thought. I might warm up by reading fantasy material. I will write a certain way, and I sort of decompress the day. And at night, okay, I'm writing maybe a military sci-fi, so it's going to be tighter prose, military, abbreviations, military language, more tight, more action oriented. And by night, you can sort of become that person for it. You have time to read different books over the
Yeah.
day. You're almost like cleansing your palate.
Mhm.
And I think that would work for me as well. But that's also a craft, right? It's no different than an actor then stepping into a different role.
Mm.
So this is another question that we wrote down. So do you have a favorite side character? If so, who?
Oh, that changes sometimes in the book. I mean, obviously, like Halloween is one of my favorites. Shola demands to be a favorite because you can't not
Yes.
respect the cat. Um, but
Good answer.
in book 2, there is another character that Ari meets in the desert who is sort of the idea of a polymath, like a pseudo Benjamin Franklin, like very interested in the sciences as well as stories and the arts as well as myths and legends. And he was one of my favorite characters to write in book 2 specifically, especially because he helps open Ari's eyes to the idea of cleverness versus wisdom, a lot of moral
Yeah.
growth, and he kind of also rewards Ari's curiosity. He's somebody who finds his own place in the world through learning, similar to like what Ari likes to do, where Ari loves knowledge and he's curious, but he's made this his career path. And
Mm.
it was a very good, fascinating like mentor student dynamic between them, but also friendship. And the overall other second character I guess I'd really like to write is predominantly through the books, either Coley because of his antagonistic relationship with Ari, but the fact that he's sort of subverted that at times because of a character he was pretending to be in book 1, that was almost
Oh
mentor-like
yes.
with Ari. And
Mm.
I get to sort of play the same enigmas that Ari in the present day has around him. I get to apply to Coley in the past. And I think that's really, really fun because you don't know 100% about both of these characters and why they're the way they are. But you
Yeah.
just know that there was one moment in time which put them at odds with each other. And Coley's had opportunities to kill Ari, and you don't know why he hasn't. And Ari has tried everything he can to kill Coley, and he's failed. And you don't know in so far in the story why hasn't Ari been able to kill him, and why this weird relationship between them. Why hasn't Coley just snuffed him out? And I know the answer to that, and I want to keep teasing and playing it along. But I think he's fun to write with the idea that I know his secrets, and slowly, for people
Yeah.
who pay attention, they come to light. But there's also an enigma around him that I think keeps him a curious villain. He's not a very cut and copy, dry pasted caricature
No.
of a villain.
Mm.
Like he has his own
No.
clear motivations. He's concerned with his own problems, and at times Ari comes along like Ari's not even really one of his concerns. Like he's just like a gnat in the way, and I kind of like that relationship.
Yeah, I think my favorite side character would be Christian because
Yeah, okay,
well,
that's fair.
any of the ones that were locked away really because again when you mentioned like the mental health representation, you can see that in how um they reacted, and obviously you can see that you know the mentor is it's really taken a toll on him having to look after them and knowing that these kids have been locked up. But I
Right.
just it's the fact that he can be different people and he doesn't understand. As soon as these different people came out, like because I've read a lot about mental health and I did psychology at uni, I immediately thought like DID,
DID, yes, he has a magical
the
case
different
of
people.
DID.
Um,
Yes.
but the fact that he's just like, oh, did he come out? Oh, did he? And he's totally doesn't understand, and he doesn't see why. And he's just like, oh,
Yeah.
that's son, so he comes out from time to time. And it was just, I would love to meet all his personalities, like
And that's what
all
I'm
his
going to be
roles,
doing. Hopefully,
and
his novella that I want to do.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the goal. Because he actually gave that to himself, which I can share that. It's a spoiler, not spoiler, that I want to elaborate the more you learn of his stories. Because I actually at one point wanted to give him a novella series, following his adventures in his life. Because you learn more about him in book two, and that
yeah,
maybe or maybe not, he's not always locked up, which is troublesome and worrisome, but also interesting.
yes,
And he the way the bindings work, and this is mentioned more in book two, is like they can't not affect you back if they're powered by belief, and belief changes people. The things
yeah,
you believe will inevitably change you, which is a big part of this series. Not just stories, but what you believe matters. And
yeah,
Krisham was unable to perform bindings by himself. You learn in the past, but he tricked himself into thinking, well, if I can't do them, what if I believe through like acting, method acting, I was a famous legendary person who could do that? So he started forcibly adopting personas and convincing himself he could. But the problem with that, with working with the specific magic, is that it sort of worked back against him. And to only do that, he had to become that person. And his belief
yeah,
actually fractured his psyche and created those people in him. Like those are genuine living identities now within him through the magic system. And he's believed to the point that he is inseparable for them. Like he needs them to perform those magics, that those identities are not coded as part of his personality. And he doesn't
Hmm.
have 100% control in his case. He is sort of both, and this is obviously a magical version of DID. It's not a one-to-one. He's sort of
yeah,
both a hostage as well as a sort of loving host, because he actually gets along with a lot of the personalities you see. Like he doesn't have control over himself, and some of them are coded to different aspects of his life. You're going to learn like survival mechanisms,
yeah,
similar to someone who has like a survival pattern or an instinct based off of trauma.
Hmm.
yeah,
Krisham's very complicated character, but he's probably one of the most dangerous and or most powerful characters in the story so far. He just
yeah,
hasn't been given the room to show that because he's not interested in power.
yeah.
He's interested in a very different thing, which you learn more about when I get to tell a story.
I mean, it's fascinating to me because the whole concept of DID in general is something I've always been fascinated with. Like how you, because of certain traumas in your life, your brain can actually create these different alter
Mhm.
egos to help you cope with that. Like the fact that a brain can do that is amazing in general. Like it's just absolutely crazy. But the fact that you've put it into a magical setting, and as soon as I met him and we met his alt as well, I was like, I think I like this guy. He would be my kind of person who I'd love to like sit
Yeah,
down and interview. Maybe at a distance so he couldn't stab me, but like
yeah.
um, I would love to like I can't wait for that side of it because I would want to know more about the ones that were locked up in general. Um and the fact that the guy who teaches him also used to be locked up. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You should not be
I thought
out.
that was kind of important because like it showed the risk from the very beginning what the bindings are, because Ari has been constantly warned away from them, in that
Yeah,
there's danger to this that fundamentally changes you as a person. And
Hmm.
we see a very different Ari from the beginning as an adult versus young Ari, where the present day Ari is more, I don't want to say stoic, but he's more reserved. He doesn't leap into action as much. Like he still does, but he
yeah,
tries to think things through more unless it's a hot button trigger, like in book one, Saving Eloine from the Clericals, which are sort of like a religious fanatical group of
yeah,
enforcement authority. They're more tied to the church than the state government or the monarchy. And that's where he springs back into action versus he seems almost defeated in the present day. Like he's clearly living with aspects of depression and PTSD from something in the
yeah,
past that hasn't caught
Hmm.
up yet in the story to what
yeah.
prompted that and why he's no longer Ari of legend and why he identifies strictly as the storyteller.
Yeah.
Yeah, And I love the fact that you haven't revealed all that information. That's something like that's to come. And I've started book 2,
Yeah.
and obviously book 2 leads on, immediately from book 1. So and it's obviously without giving anything away. It's like the fact that he doesn't refer to himself as Aaron. He wants to hear what other people think of this character,
Yes.
and he wants to know what other people have to say. Um, it's like he wants to know, but he doesn't want to be associated with that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's kind of like he wants a notoriety, but he doesn't want people to know that it's him. But he
Yeah.
likes hearing the stories, and it's just kind of like finding out why that's the case, and
Yeah.
like
Yes.
so it's
How his own
just
stories have evolved to the point they have.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, Shola is precious and needs to be protected at all costs. And two other characters in the crow's nest, especially the one who bonds with the one who bonds with Shola.
Oh yeah, Emmy. She is a
Yeah,
student
she
who
doesn't.
has
Oh,
she doesn't understand anymore like the idea of linear time as well as sort of the idea of permanence. So like with ADHD, you have object permanence. If it's not there,
Hmm.
it's out of sight, it's out
yeah,
of mind, it doesn't exist.
yeah,
She has something similar in that because the way she understands how to heal now trauma, which unfortunately happened through a traumatic experience, which you'll learn more about her later on. Um, she doesn't heal her wounds as if they're being healed from the present. It's almost like she's rewinding time, the space of where
yeah,
her wound is, because they're healed to a point where they were never hurt. If that's the
yeah,
case, was she ever hurt in the first place? If the way her body heals was to a prior state, not healing the new one, because she doesn't have scars. So that
yeah,
affects her understanding of if she constantly scratches at a wall and wears down her own fingers and bleeds, but she can heal it to a point that they were never hurt. Were they ever hurt at all? So it's become a very interesting logical paradox in her mind. And it's sort of with that power of belief sort of cascaded forward. Can she really be hurt if she was never hurt? And it's become this obsessive touchstone for her. And it's sort of
yeah,
taken all of her attention, and her mental health unfortunately has suffered from that. Because if you keep thinking about a question like that, it can hurt your mind. There's similar examples of things like that with some people, not everybody, who exactly have schizophrenic traits. Now she isn't schizophrenic, but there is something specific that I haven't explained that's cultured her down that path of she's very obsessed with the idea of how people are hurt if they were never hurt at all. How does that
Mm.
work? And can you maybe
yeah.
turn back the clock far enough? Like how severe the injury can you turn back?
Yeah, especially she's been messing with bindings as well, and obviously part of that is
Mhm.
the belief system that mixed with that constant question. Obviously, the bindings can affect your mind anyway, can't they? So it's
Mhm.
like I was immediately softened to her because like the fact that she was, he's like, well, if you don't do it, I can bring Charlotte to see you. That almost made me cry.
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
that moment where she's just like, I didn't do it. I was I couldn't like it was it was just adorable, and like those kind of moments. Again, I don't know if it's because I'm the kind of I'm someone who struggles with mental health issues and stuff, and it's like that little moment was a moment of happiness. Wanted like the cat.
yeah,
It's just like the one thing she wanted, and
yeah,
it was her little moment. And whenever she spends time with Shola, she could just see how happy she is, and
Mm.
it's
yeah,
just takes away from the darkness that she's locked away in a room by herself.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
stuck with those thoughts that are causing a harm all the time. And it's just, there's so much to talk about. I could talk about that all day. But like the brain and like stuff like that, I could go into like really deep discussions about how the brain works and stuff because all that stuff fascinates me. So I could spend I could read a whole book just on the kids that were
Brains.
locked away, the brains and how they work and all that kind of stuff. It's yeah, we need a full size novella told from Shola's POV.
I'd read that.
I would
Yeah.
I would love to do that. I actually might, because there was a part from book two that I had to cut before my editors got it, because the original draft was like 485,000 words, and then we cut it to 450, and then we cut it to 400, and then 385, which is where it's at now. But part of it was Ari and Shola's time on the road. No spoilers, but they go somewhere else for the first time in the past, and there's a road trip. But I actually wrote the road trip to get to where they need to go, and there was
Mm.
about like 5 to 8 chapters of fantasy hijinks on like a silk road, and I was like, this isn't necessary. It's fun, but it's part of the slice of life adventures, and I know my editors are going to tell me to cut it, and I cut it before they saw it, but they were right. They were like, yeah, we would have asked you to cut that. I can now go back and flesh those out as like maybe 2 novellas of Ari's point of
Mm.
view, on the road, and then even Shola's point of view of like fantasy hijinks and adventures. So I thought about doing it. I have the material. I just need to rewrite it to make it fit
Yeah.
as a standalone, but it could.
The Adventures of Ari and Shola. That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be so much fun.
Well,
I
like
love
the
that
Adventures
book.
of Shola and Ari.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Shola is first.
Yeah.
Cut
That
Ari.
is how his short story opens. Yeah. In Shola's short story, which is from his POV, it does say that he adopted Ari, not the other way around. So
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
clearly like that. This is all his story. It's just Ari
Yeah.
is his translator because he can't speak to humans because humans are too dumb to understand cats. Was his logic?
Yeah. Probably quite true, isn't it? To be fair.
At least that's how they see it. Yes.
Yeah. Like, well, here's me. I love cats, but I know that they have attitude, so can't wait to find out what personality mine's gonna have. I'll get a really sassy one that everyone's hugs, and all I want to do is sit down and cuddle my cat, and it'll be one of those ones that just don't
Won't
want to
sit
hug.
next to you.
No, my sister's cat used to put up with you for about 5 minutes. She'd let you stroke her, and then as soon as she was done with you, she'd turn around and dig her nails into your hand and be like, "No, I'm done," and walk off.
Cats.
Forget not knowing he was a tour editor. Tell him about the time people thought you were a Hollywood agent and no one spoke to you.
So there was, oh god, there was one time where I was at a convention and I was wearing sunglasses, and it was mostly just because like long flight, different way, and I heard sunglasses can actually reduce jet lag, and I was like crap face tired, no caffeine, and I
Oh.
I don't want to say addicted, but I've been used to taking caffeine every day. So you don't take
Yeah.
caffeine for a day when you're used to it, you have a crash that day, and I was just in a very low energy mood. And I got to a conference and I was all dressed up, wearing sunglasses still because it was bright. I just didn't want to. And nobody talked to me the entire convention, and I didn't know why. And I found out from another author that they thought I was like a Hollywood producer or agent there, maybe to pick up IPs, and no one wanted to talk to me to make because they were afraid of making a bad impression or something, or like they pissed me off. And I was just like, I was tired. Like it was the most surreal, weird thing. Like everybody ignored me, and I was like, "Am I the asshole? Like nobody wants to talk to me, or like what's going on?" And everyone was like, "Yeah, the first time I thought you weren't like a writer. You were someone from Hollywood, like to hear buy stuff or talk to like the other author guests." And I was like, "No, just new writer guy here with all of you. Thanks for not talking to me." Like,
I just wanted to sell my books.
yeah. Like I was still self-published at this time, and it was just it was just very humbling and surreal afterwards because it was just like that's not what I expected. I thought like maybe I don't know, I had something stuck in my teeth or just maybe everyone already knew each other was the most logical one. Like every social group there clicks and stuff. It's like okay, I haven't met somebody, the right person to talk to, and I'm just a new guy. Okay, and then afterwards like no, everyone just didn't want to like make a bad impression with you. It was like oh well, sorry to burst your bubble. I'm not connected with Hollywood. I can't get your books made in the movies. I'd be doing it for myself if I could.
Like that.
It would be a great series if it did get turned
thank
into. I prefer it as a series. Like
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think you. I think
the
it would be better
episodic-
as a
yeah,
series than a movie.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's just too much stuff. Like
yeah,
they don't make, or they don't, unless it's like Fast and Furious for some reason. They don't seem to make films constantly anymore. You know, they don't. It's
Yeah.
not like when Harry Potter came out and they made 7-8 films. They don't do that
yeah,
anymore.
which is
It's
weird
like-
why they don't do that anymore because people would watch them.
but they make
Yeah.
5 Toy Stories, so
Yeah.
But I
That's
definitely
true.
think it would be like it'd be great as a series. But I was
Yeah.
saying to Chels that I felt like the pacing of the book is slower in the beginning, but I
Mhm.
found that after a certain point it kind of speeds up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I found that like when the story sped up, because I listened to it on audio as well, like I sped the audio up as well, and it kind of like fit the pace of the book. And I like the fact that it starts off slow, you build this whole character, and you slowly start building this story, and then all of a sudden these things happen,
Yeah.
and then it's just like it jumps from one thing to another, then it's past, and then it's the interlude,
Yep.
and then it's kind of like
And that
then
was
it builds
set
up
up
this thing at the
too.
end, and I'm just like,
So there's some really fun like meta stuff I'm doing for authors to like get that. And these are mostly inside jokes that writers would get, like no different than if a magician does something and another magician notices. The very opening, Ari talks about how you build a story, and he's feeding wood to a fire like with logs, and he's adding layers. And that was specifically talked and teased out. Like the opening is very slow until we get to the next layer of who is Ari, and Elwyn realizes that. And then it opens the frame narrative around the outside, and you have the nesting stories that go back. You get the past narrative, the nesting stories inside. So then we immediately get to the past story, Ari starting his life in the theater. And then very quickly within the first few chapters, he has a friend come, and then he tells her a story, which is a nesting story inside of that story, which is the Brahm chapter, which was the last chapter of the sample I had, the one written that sold tour on the series, that was written with the couplets and the quatrains, and then there's secrets even inside that chapter. And the more I got to get to the next point in the layers that I was building, the more I got to sort of undress them and do more. And that was intentionally sort of done that way. And there's little meta narrative tricks inside of like me poking that I'm doing this thing or doing that some readers are figuring out, or English teachers, and I'm hoping writer friends definitely figure out, because these are just a little bit on the nose writing tricks. I'm hoping another author would notice, like, okay, I see what you did there. That's funny, or that's cool.
So all I'm saying is, if standing outside in the rain is a requirement to get book 4, I just need an address. It'll happen.
with like the boombox from the 80s or 90s and just singing love songs to tour, go lengths. Yeah. It might. We'll see. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but.
I mean, we just need you to record something, and we could play MC Smolder instead.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I walked into that one.
Post on our channels. Here's an update from MC Smolder. In my reread, Ronnie made me cry too. The first binding and importance of the stories hit hard when you have a family member with dementia. Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. My aunt's actually going through that right now, so it's been a learning lesson for me too in the family. How much that disease can rob people of I guess not only themselves, but the family member's identity of that person too, as you watch them go through that change and the degenerative abilities of it.
I think when people weave in real life things, and I know people, it's a very polarizing thing, like you said, when people put sort of like politics in books and mental health in books, some people really like it, some people are just like, why would you need to put that in a fantasy book? But for me, I feel like it connects me more to the characters when you put like real life political things in books, and you put real life sort of mental health issues and things in books, and events that will break a person and make, and they go through the hardships and stuff. I think for me, as a character driven person, like when reading books, I kind of need that to connect with my characters. But sometimes it does hit me close to home sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's what it is.
Yeah, I think that's part of why we read those, to connect to certain characters going through stuff like us. And that's why the breadth of fiction is so wide, because there are so many different characters now, like so many different kinds of people, and we get to see them represented. At the end of the day, like one of the reasons I wanted Ari, one of the magical symbolisms of the cloak specifically, was actually inspired not just by the mythological importance by cloaks, which I've talked about, but the idea that I got from Stan Lee, which is in his case, it's what Spider-Man is so emblematic of, and why the mask was important, and the idea of the hero beneath the mask. And Stan Lee has said verbally on record before that the idea of Spider-Man is that anybody can be Spider-Man. That's why the mask exists. It's a mantle. And Ari's stories are kind of like proto-hero stories in a way. As important as Ari is to this narrative, there's also a reason his name gets subsumed and taken by so many other cultures. And in book 2, there's even a mention that like some of his stories were by a different name, a character that he knows by a feminine name. And the idea being that anybody can be a hero, anybody can be these legends and characters, and you're watching it happen even with Ari's story. Sometimes like these legends and deeds are attributed to another name, but it's clearly Ari's story that's grown out of control, and someone's co-opted it for another religious reason or a cultural reason. And it's sort of the same thing, that the hero has like 1,000,001 faces, but the hero doesn't have to be Ari's gender, his age, any of that. Like the idea of these legends can be anybody, quite literally. And then what I'm doing and playing with it within the narrative sense for the story entertainment is part of that, but then also the entertainment factor of what the story is supposed to give readers.
Yeah. I worry about Christian, and Auntie May, they need to be protected.
Or else.
Or else they're going to be outside your door with the boombox.
Yeah.
I remember being similarly protected about Luna Lovegood in Harry Potter as a kid. Yeah. There's those characters that you need to protect at all times, isn't it? So, Let's have a look, see some more comments.
There is some that's a theory, which is interesting, but I'm not sure if it's like a.
Is it a spoiler? Or is it?
They say that Ronnie won't confirm, but it's regarding.
Is it that?
Yeah.
That theory. I have actually heard that. I am not going to answer that, but you will learn who Eloise is through the series, and you will learn what happened to Nisha. She's not a throwaway character. If I tell where to look for, the problem is people will figure out some stuff, because I don't know how to say this, but Nisha, what people think has happened to her isn't what's happened to her. Maybe she's still around, not where you think.
See, I like this because I did mention to Chels about Eloise, and I was like, well, it got very attached is the wrong word. Like there was this connection very quickly with Eloise, and it sort of obviously grew throughout the book, and it's clear that there's a reason for that, and it's kind of like, well, it doesn't make every time a female character's come in, I'm like, could that be the connection? could that be
right? There is a deeper connection between those two. Whether or not even they're aware of it, I'm not sure, because I don't want to spoiler it. It could be one-sided. One of them is more aware, but I can probably, I should say, like, Eloise is not Nisha. I can say that. They both have their own stories. They're both important. Book 2, for people who pay attention, will answer more of those. I do want to write Nisha's stories of where she's at during the main body stories, like if I wrote novellas, but that would absolutely spoiler what she's been doing, because she has been present, just not where people have noticed or taken, I guess, a really sharp eye.
I like that. More intrigue.
Yeah, 100%.
Ronnie will not.
There's a lot of characters who are more than they seem.
Yeah, I mean, the whole mentor thing, like, that shocked me. Like, there's so many things that just, I don't know, maybe it's because there's not. I was just invested in the story, so I wasn't looking for things that like to sort of like catch me out, or looking for shock factors. In a lot of the more fast paced books, you expect certain shock things to come up, certain twists to come up, certain things to come out, but you're kind of looking for those. But because it was very much, I was just invested in the story.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I wanted.
Yeah,
I wanted the performance to be what people focused on. And then Ari has lines, and other people have said there are secrets and stories a lot through the books, including some stories are very similar. And these are mentioned, and like how you might need to slow down. Like, it's actually talked about in there. And then, because I actually find that a lot of the old classic myths I love are very similar. There are a lot of similarities and secrets if you pay attention to them, but you don't have to. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. You can get the full value just listening to it as entertainment. But I've always loved stories where if I reread something, I'm like, oh, there's more than just foreshadowing there. There's so many other kinds of secrets. And this thing references this, where if now I read book 2 and I go back and reread book 1 after, it completely changes how I reread book 1. Now it's a whole different story because I have new context or stuff I just thought was innocuous before. And that changes everything. And I've always loved that kind of like circular storytelling, but also circular rereading. And I thought that creates a new kind of engagement where if my job as an author to what, at least what I believe, is to create something that's very rereadable, at least over and over, this is one of the best ways to do it, because then it's the most added value I feel I can give, that I also happen to like back as a reader. It's a very me thing of like, I want people to constantly go back and be able to reread the books, but not just for the main story, which I'm glad that they love, but also hopefully the little nesting secrets inside that keep adding more depth the more you reread it.
Yeah, I feel once I've read book 2, obviously, because you've only just brought it out, we're gonna have to wait for book 3. So by the time book 3 comes out, I will reread the first 2. But I definitely think that on reread, I'm gonna have to get my tabs out. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to get my tabs out for that one, because I feel like there's gonna be way more that I pick up on reread.
Well, by that point, it'll be paperbacks, and you can.
Yeah, I could tab and annotate and scribble away in it, which people hate, but you got your hardbacks for your displays, and then your paperbacks where you can put all your tabs and your writing in.
Right.
Well, that's true. Yeah. I mean, I don't hate annotating. I just don't understand how you guys can do it, because it's it's one thing to read the book, and then you're also paying attention to pick out things that you want to highlight and tab, and then obviously everything's got a different color, so you've got to pay attention to what color it is. It's just too much. It's too much.
I love tabbing a book. I love tabbing a favorite book. It's is she Shola? that'd be epic.
It would be. Now he tells me.
I knew Nisha wasn't a throwaway character. I think
no,
we
I
all
did too.
She is not.
Yeah.
He's constantly mentioned. Like, she's quite a strong,
yes,
like objective for Ari throughout book one, and I was like, yeah, she's gonna come back. I just don't know how.
Yeah. And something she's done is she's also left a huge mark on Ari, where some people have figured out, some haven't, that she's the one where he first learns to look at people and try to guess their stories, because the game they play on the roof. And that's something that stuck with him, coded. Like, you notice throughout in book 2, you'll see him do it more. He starts intrinsically understanding the stories of people just at a glance. And maybe that there's magic in that, maybe there's not. I haven't shared with the audience. I know the answer to that, but there might be other kinds of magic in the world, and it's very interesting if that's where he learned it from. Learned it from her, and what that might mean and why, and you have to read more books to figure that out. But yeah, she's not a throwaway character.
I love it.
That's good.
How many gods has Ari met by the end of Doors of Midnight?
Well, there's the reader answer, which that's up for debate depending on what you count the Naglok in book 1, if you do count that as a god or not, depending on the interpretation. And then there's the answer I know, which I can't give. So it's going to be up to the readers to decide what they quantify as a god or not, despite what's said in the books.
Fair enough.
I love that. Using your brain.
Ugh,
I'll ask something. Is there anything in book 2 that made you sad when writing?
Yes. There was a scene where Ari has to, without spoilers, because it's still pretty, do something very hard because he's still a child in the past story, even though he doesn't like thinking of himself as one. There's something very traumatically hard he has to do to help other people, and it puts him sort of in like the sacrificial role, and he's learning how to deal with that, and it makes him actually cry, because he has to do something that he did a long time ago, but under different circumstances, where a long time ago when he did this very hard action, it was to protect people. Well, now he's doing it again, but it's less self-defense, it's more preemptive. So it feels a lot crueler to him to be the first one to make this move. And it happens in a sequence in a city in a desert, maybe halfway through book 2. I don't remember exactly the word count, because when I originally wrote it in my head, it's still a 450,000 draft versus like where it's at now, 385. I know where I did the cuts, but I did them very surgically after the book was done. So I would jump through sections and cut and bridge stuff and make sure I kept enough of the details of what I wanted, so we could meet the publishing quota, but also have the story I wanted. But where this happens, I can roughly tell like location without spoiling it. But that made me really sad to write for Ari, because I knew that was traumatically hard for him, and I definitely felt the emotions when writing it.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. I finished Doors of Midnight and immediately went back and reread the first binding. Sleep, who cares about it when there are bookish mysteries to solve?
Aww.
I mean, that is fair.
And that's how you know you've got
so
true fans and real readers.
That
there are people out there that will do that. Or they will, every time you bring out a new book, they'll go back and reread the ones you've already brought out. And that's just a lovely thing. The fact that they've, your Smolder Squad have already mentioned that there's a Discord where they talk and like share theories and stuff.
Yeah.
That's true. Like, you're making an impact on people. That's beautiful.
That's kind of, I think, the goal that like everyone would love to have, and it's crazy saying it because I did hope one day I would have those kinds of readers. Like, that's what I specifically wrote for. I'm very fortunate to have people like you all who read, because I do love, I don't want to say smart readers, because I hate the idea that implies like readers aren't smart. I think all readers are smart. I think readers just have different passions. Like, readers are smart, but maybe not everyone wants to go Easter egg hunting. But I'm very glad that I seem to be finding the people who do, because that's who I wrote this for, and that's what I love. I personally love books like that, where I have to go back and really think an Easter egg hunt. My favorite games are like that. Like I said, the From Software games, where the story isn't handed to you. You do have to go dig, and you don't have to, but the more you dig, the more secrets come out, and the more narrative connections. You're like, oh, I had no idea this was happening. That's what really leads to this. And there's a whole theory crafting community for the Dark Souls and Elden Ring franchises. Their entire YouTubers have made careers doing this, and they share all their findings and all the details and research that went to it, and crediting other researchers. And I think it's a very fascinating way to discuss stuff, because how mythology is discussed a lot, where we're constantly referencing other sources, and especially in the lens of comparative mythology, the similarities between cultures and epics. And I thought that would be something cool to sort of apply in my storytelling as well, to have that technique done, because it's also a real thing, that it just adds that extra depth and that numinous quality to myths, that they're real, but the parts of them are intangible and they're kind of mythical, and we don't know everything, and that leaves intentional theory crafting space for the audience to be engaged. Like, it's an extra form of engagement that you get. Like, you are part of the story in a way, because you're sort of trying to solve pieces and you're coming up with new stories as you do.
Yeah, see, like the way that I like to read is I will have epic fantasies that I like to read, and then in between I'll read sort of like your I call them palette cleanser books. Like, I'll read a short contemporary or a faster paced novel or a manga. I've now got a shelf full of manga, and then I like to have those books that sort of change my brain. 'Cause obviously, there was John Gwynne was my first author that I got into that was like epic fantasy. Obviously, the longest his books are 4 books long, but then there was Ryan Cahill, and his series getting bigger, and the books are getting bigger and bigger as they go. But then we've also found like Rob J. Hayes and Michael R. Miller. Like, although Michael R. Miller's is more of a younger audience, he's still got quite a long. Well, I think it's a 5-book series that he's doing at the moment, but I do enjoy, and I'm finding that those kinds of authors are becoming ones that are becoming my favourite. It's like that I will reread and reread those series, because you can find new Easter eggs in, like, and you can go hunting for all that kind of thing. So you'll be joining them on my shelves when I have my bookcase.
So much. That's so kind of you.
I'm eagerly awaiting my broken binding edition to come for the second.
Oh, thank you. It's lovely. I actually just got mine in like this week. I think it's outside of arm reach, but it's there. Yes.
I'm very mindful of the fact that we've kept this for almost 2 hours, so we'll make this question the last question.
Sure.
So what is the planned title for book 3? Are you allowed to tell us?
I cannot tell you, but I do have it. I will wait. I mean, Adam's in my Discord, so at some point he will probably accidentally find out anyways, because I'll probably just share an alpha or something secretly. I do have it. Tor and GoLanks know all 12 book titles, as much as they probably don't want to know. I'll share that eventually. It has been secretly leaked in the first 2 books, if people pay attention, though, because every book title is in the books. Like, book 1 predicted the first
I love it when authors
3 or 4. And book 2 predicted. Book 2 has, I think, books 3 again. It has book 4, book 5, book 6. The last book in the series, and book 8, I think. So books 1 and 2 cover most of the titles are already secretly in them, if people pay attention when they see. So yeah.
You're gonna have to find them. We have to just bully Ronnie and send amazing memes because he stresses so much, and we like making him smile and spit take. That clip will live forever. I made a whole mood board. Ronnie also got booted out of his own Discord server at one point because he hasn't told them he was over 18. Oh, really?
Yes, I forgot. There is an age limit to one part of my Discord, just because I thought it'd be prudent, because sometimes people share like memes that like maybe someone under 18 shouldn't see, and I was like, okay, that part of chat should probably have an 18 requirement. Like, well, let's be adults, and I put it in there, but because I never finished my Discord profile, I never had my age in it, and then my own Discord kicked me out, and I had to like get back into my own Discord, which is weird. And they're like, tell us you're 18. It's like, I am, but they didn't give me the option to put it into my profile anywhere, so I couldn't figure that out, and I had to fight to get back into my own Discord.
That's absolutely hilarious.
That's a great one.
So do we have sort of like a tentative time frame for book 3?
Yeah, I'm hoping to turn it in next spring. I might be a month or 2 late, because there's been a lot of stuff that happened with book 2 that unfortunately stacked with life stuff. But I can definitely finish it by next spring. I'm already going on it. My publisher would probably want early end of winter next year, so maybe February. I'm thinking March, April, just 1 or 2 months extra. And the timeline is still going to be hopefully 2026. Yeah, 2026, not next year. So 1 year after, because I'm on a book every 2 years because the size of them. With the publishing paper crisis going on, the way they had to allocate paper, I think they need more lead time for mine, is what they were saying, because they want to make sure that the costs. So I don't understand the exact print run costs, but I know Tor factors and so does Go links all this with what they earn per copy, and they want to be, I guess, ahead of the ball with whatever it's going to cost them to do a print run. And I guess again that's going to be exacerbated because this year it's my book coming out and then Sanderson's. So that's nearly 800 to 1 million words, 800,000, 900,000 words between 2 books, which is a lot to print. And yeah, I know that the printing industry is probably frustrated by the lead times and the prints for all of that. So
well, it
I'm
just
hoping
means you'll have more and more readers hyping up your book when it comes to
book 3.
yeah.
yeah, there is that is something nice to hope for. And at least this pace doesn't kill me. I'd still like to move to a Brandon Sanderson pace for books this big, 1 every 3 years, so I could write other books between and just make these like the best books of my life, where I could practice on 1 to 2 other cool books, standalones, other series, write them, do something great, and then take those skills and push book 4 or 5 or 6 to even bigger envelopes or whatever I can do.
So what you're saying is you're aiming for people to have bookcases of R.R.Virdi, not bookshelves. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. That would absolutely be great. Yeah, if I get the green light from publishing, I'd absolutely be doing that.
A Verdiverse bookcase. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
I better move house.
I mean, same. I've just moved here.
I mean, you guys are booktubers, so isn't it like a tax deduction for you? I'd like to think so, because I know with writers, if we buy books and we do the proper business documentation, that's research for us. It's content we need to make other content. So as booktubers,
I don't get paid for this.
I would look at I mean, but you guys put money and time into it. Maybe it's worth looking into if you could write off your book copy somewhere. I don't know what the tax code is. Consult the tax professional over there, but if you can, why not?
We could try. We could but try.
We can but try.
All right, I put my boss off for an hour, but sadly I have to go. Oh my god, I love this so much. But thank you, Ronnie, for coming on. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
And in case you didn't know, we loved your book.
Thank you so much. It means the world.
And I'm on to book 2. And I've already read the first couple of chapters whilst I was working today, because I was working, I promise.
Really hard.
It's so hard listening to Ari in jail, but it's fine. I had to find out what was going on. Well, I've been more than happy to have you back on to promote Bookstores, because I will be looking out for it. But thank you very much.
+4, +5, +6.
Yeah, and all the way to 12. I'm gonna have to. We'll be messaging so please buy further books
and bring back arcs.
yeah, that would be great. I think unfortunately post-pandemic a lot of arcs stopped happening.
Yeah.
And we need a Shola novella. That is what we're saying.
Yeah. I will make sure I remember that.
Thank you for those that joined, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you. Bye.